This morning at his first annual interfaith breakfast, Mayor Mamdani retold his childhood story of coming home from a friend's bar mitzvah on the Upper West Side and commenting to his dad, "Why don't we Muslims do that?" A question, he quipped, that remains unanswered to this day. In a fierce condemnation of the federal government's thuggish, power-hungry, my words, murderous immigration and customs enforcement, the mayor taught us from a handful of religious traditions that remind us to take extra care of the most vulnerable among us. There were at least 2 references to psukim in the Hebrew Bible. Afterward, Rabbi James commented to Rabbi Werber and me, I'll paraphrase, "Our mayor just taught some serious Torah about welcoming the stranger, about supporting the neediest, with hundreds of people in the room who had come together for community and prayer." Sounds a lot like the bar mitzvah he never had. So look, B'nai Mitzvah at age 34 is not something so unusual. We celebrate B'nai Mitzvah of all ages and stages in this room right here for adults and young adults, teens alike. But what is unique in the scheme of B'nai Mitzvah is celebrating such a thing when you are 50 days old. And in a way, that is what this week's Torah portion explores. Parshat Yitro, right? Imagine that you're born, and you're not even a single child of your parent or parents, and you're not a twin or a triplet or quadruplet, but you're actually born collectively with 600,000 families, all at the same time, as we read last week, being birthed through the Sea of Reeds, out of ancient Egypt, into freedom. That central narrative of Shabbat Shirah that has inspired these 31 years of concerts that we're talking about. And now 6 weeks later in ancient time, that we read only 1 week later on our calendar, 50 days old, you have the opportunity to stand at Mount Sinai, encounter the divine, be introduced to all the mitzvot, giving you the freedom to actively choose a life of meaning, a life of goodness. And if these were expectations on our ancestors freshly out of Egypt, freshly out of hundreds of years of bondage, imagine the expectations on us now. Being enslaved as a people for that much time, and suddenly on the eve of the first Pesach, having the opportunity to look at the growing new moon and mark your own time is for sure a paradigm shift for each person. Being instructed in the 613 commandments that are more focused on justice, humility, and power critiques, rather than on Pharaoh's idolatry of power. Being told you have choices and your actions have consequences seems revolutionary. And whether we draw the analogy to a Declaration of Independence or a Constitution, it seems that our ancestors heard this preamble, "Anochi Adonai Elohecha asher hotzeticha," I am the Eternal One, your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt. And as Hashem begins the Decalogue, we imagine that everyone except Moshe is scared. Moshe, says the people, you speak with us, and we will listen. But maybe don't have God, I'm saying it says maybe, that's just don't have God speak with us. We'll die. Moshe assures us not to be afraid, but indeed we, all 600,000 households, remain at the foot of the mountain while Moshe ascends. But be careful what you wish for. Moshe does as the people request, but ends up on the mountaintop for so long receiving Torah that the Israelites have to send out a search party. Oh wait, they don't actually send out a search party. Instead, as we'll learn, they build the golden calf. Should they have sent out a search party? I would say yes. But now, 90 days out of slavery, do our ancestors really have a frame of reference for how you're supposed to act when you just begin to trust someone to show up for you and they don't? They probably don't have so much of this frame of reference yet. On the top of the mountain, God seems to feel abandoned, God's self. Observing from Moshe that the people down below are worshiping an idol. God in the story is already, in these next few weeks, scheming to abandon the very people that God redeemed and start anew. And Moshe, caught in the middle, will have to remind God of their commitment to the people. And Moshe will eventually come down the mountain, both unafraid to express his anger at the people for their actions, and recognizing that the people might not be quite ready for the Torah yet. Following this read, some commentators will describe Moshe in a few weeks smashing the tablets as an act of compassion rather than an act of anger. It's bad enough that the people have made an idol, but it would be even worse if they found out that no idolatry is way at the top of those stone tablets, near the top of those stone tablets. One of the lessons I've been thinking about this week is the risk of solitude, the risk of feeling like you have to go about something alone. It's almost ironic, or maybe it is ironic, that the biggest gathering of our people in all of our sacred stories and all of our history, in this week's Torah portion, in the most gigantic gathering, God feels alone. The people feel abandoned, and I imagine Moshe must have felt betwixt and between, uniquely alone himself. Perhaps the most explicit lesson in the Parshat of the risk of being alone comes earlier than the revelation itself. Moshe has been making decisions, big and small, for the whole people on his own, and his father-in-law, Yitro, the namesake of the Parsha, advises him to do otherwise. Lo tuchal sohu levadecha. You cannot do it alone. Delegate. Set up systems. But the midrashic meta lesson that we carry with us from this parsha is that, as Stephen Sondheim, alav shalom, might teach, no one is alone. And in traditional Jewish terms, we might say, all of us were standing at Mount Sinai, the past, the present, and the future of the Jewish people, every single one of us. So no matter how isolated we feel at a time or in a place, no matter how and when we might question if or how we belong, we were all there at the foot of the mountain. Or, as Rabbi Dorothy said, it wasn't a dream. It was a place, and you, and you, and you, and you were there. And maybe to some degree, we are all still there, learning together, revealing the Torah of our written texts and the Torah of our lived experience. Yet perhaps sometimes still afraid, and at other times more open to catching a glimpse of the divine. As February began, Punxsutawney Phil, the groundhog, ran back into his burrow when he saw his own shadow. Can you blame him? It is a cold, dark time in our country. But February is also when we mark Black History Month in America, and it's when we mark Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month. Individuals, families, organizations, communities have an opportunity to challenge ourselves to pay extra attention both to the history of how we got to where we got to in this country. Shout out Ruthie Berman, who I know tells this history beautifully, and if you all haven't had a chance to hear Ruthie do it, find a time to chat with her, because she describes in such plain and clear terms beautifully and painfully how racism and sexism have been cornerstones, not aberrations, in building America. If we want spring to come, we should consider not just who is in the community, but also who is missing, who is not in the room. The room is, frankly, colder, without representation from the broadest swaths of humanity? How are our favorite arts venues, television shows, spiritual spaces making an effort to consider who is not in the room? And then when we think about why, it's important not just to conjecture why among the people who are already in the room, but by building relationships with the people who aren't in the room and figuring out how a community that wishes to be reflective of, say, the diversity of race, abilities, disabilities can plan to get there. How we get to that place of understanding that inclusive is not enough, because that word already has a power dynamic in it. Who is including whom and under what conditions? And instead getting to a place where rather than including, we strive to be a community of all people. A community in which anyone can be in the room, where people who are yet uncomfortable in the room but show up anyway are made to feel visible and valued when they challenge others to live out the values that we articulate. No one is alone. None of us can do the work alone. And you, and you, and you, and you were there. All of us were there, and we are still here at Mount Sinai. Even at the coldest seasons, the warm, bright glimpses of the divine are among us. And it is our job to notice them. And all of us will do the work so much better together. Shabbat Shalom.